A young black boy, Marcus Carter, barely 16, leans against the side of a small convenience store, clutching an apple in his trembling hands. Suddenly, a loud, gruff voice cuts through the noise of the street. "Hey! You think you can just take whatever you want?" Officer Jack Monroe, a white cop with a hardened face, strides toward him. Before Marcus can respond, Monroe's fist crashes into his face. Blood trickles down Marcus's cheek, staining the pavement below. A crowd gathers, some with their phones raised, recording in disbelief. Whispers ripple through the onlookers. What's going on? Did he even do anything? Marcus stumbles but doesn't fall, his eyes wide with fear and humiliation. The officer towers over him, his badge gleaming in the sunlight. In that moment, questions fill the air. What could Marcus have done to deserve such violence? Was it really about the apple, or something deeper, something darker? This one punch sets the stage for an explosive chain of events, shaking the entire city to its core. But what happens next? And how does Marcus, bruised and battered, become the face of a movement that no one saw coming? The streets of Atlanta buzz with life, a blend of honking cars, street vendors shouting about their wares, and the rhythmic beats of music spilling out from corner shops. Among the chaos, 16-year-old Marcus Carter drifts unnoticed, a shadow in the crowd. With worn-out sneakers and a tattered hoodie, Marcus clutches an empty backpack, a painful reminder of the life he once had. Homeless and vulnerable, he moves from corner to corner, surviving on scraps and the kindness of strangers. Marcus isn't invisible to everyone, though. Officer Jack Monroe, a white cop with over a decade on the force, notices him. Known for his sharp tongue and even sharper temper, Monroe walks the streets like he owns them. His commanding voice and towering presence are enough to make even the toughest onlookers step aside. In Atlanta, a city still grappling with the deep scars of racial inequality, encounters like this are loaded with unspoken tension. Marcus is no stranger to the watchful eyes that trail him wherever he goes, an unwanted attention he's come to accept as part of his existence. But for Monroe, Marcus isn't just another teenager. In his eyes, Marcus fits a profile that's been ingrained in him through years of bias and unchecked authority. This uneasy setting, where lives intersect under the weight of prejudice and power, is about to explode in ways no one could have foreseen. It's just past noon, and the sun blazes down on the bustling streets of Atlanta. Marcus Carter, stomach growling from days without a proper meal, lingers outside a small convenience store. Through the glass window, he sees rows of fresh fruit, their bright colors almost mocking him. Hunger gnaws at him like an unrelenting shadow. After a moment of hesitation, Marcus makes his move, quietly stepping into the store and grabbing a single apple. The store owner doesn't even notice him as Marcus slips outside, biting into the fruit. The first crunch is like salvation, a brief reprieve from the ache in his belly. But before he can savor the second bite, a stern voice slices through the air. "Hey, you!" Marcus turns, his heart sinking. Officer Jack Monroe strides toward him, boots thudding against the pavement like a drumbeat of impending doom. Monroe's eyes are sharp, his expression already carrying the weight of judgment. "You think you can just take what you want?" Monroe snaps, towering over the boy. "It's just an apple," Marcus stammers, his voice trembling. "I was hungry." But Monroe isn't listening. He grabs Marcus by the collar, pulling him closer. The crowd begins to notice, murmurs rippling through the onlookers. Phones are raised, cameras pointed, but Monroe doesn't seem to care. "Stealing is stealing," Monroe growls. "You think the law doesn't apply to you?" "I didn't mean," Marcus tries to explain, but his words are cut short as Monroe's fist connects with his face. The impact is brutal. Marcus stumbles back, clutching his cheek as blood trickles down, staining his hoodie. Gasps ripple through the growing crowd. Some yell out, demanding Monroe stop. Others stand frozen, unsure of how to react. A few brave individuals hold up their phones, capturing every moment. Marcus, still dazed, locks eyes with Monroe. There's no mistaking the power imbalance. Marcus, a homeless teen with no one to stand up for him, against Monroe, an officer of the law who carries the weight of authority. The crowd's shouts grow louder, but Monroe remains unmoved, his grip on control unshaken. As Marcus wipes the blood from his face, the tension in the air thickens. The incident is far from over, and what's unfolding on this street will soon echo far beyond Atlanta. The shaky footage of Marcus's bloody face and Officer Monroe's brutal punch spreads like wildfire. Within hours, it's all over social media. Hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus and #StopPoliceBrutality trend nationwide. News anchors replay the clip, dissecting every second, while heated debates erupt online. Atlanta becomes the center of a growing storm, a microcosm of the country's deeper struggles with race and power. In the precinct, the tension is palpable. Officer Sarah Davis, a junior black officer fresh out of the academy, watches the video on her phone during her lunch break. Her hands shake slightly as she replays the moment Marcus is struck. She knows Monroe's reputation. He's brash, unyielding, and quick to judge. But this feels like more than just a lapse in judgment. That evening, Sarah sits in her car outside the precinct, conflicted. Speaking out against a senior officer feels like walking into a minefield. But as she stares at the video one last time, the image of Marcus's bloodied face sears into her mind. She knows what she has to do. Meanwhile, Marcus is taken to a nearby shelter by Emily Carter, a middle-aged woman who happened to be in the crowd that day. Emily isn't one to turn a blind eye. She cleans Marcus's wounds and sits with him as he explains his story, how he's been living on the streets since he was 14, scrounging for food and shelter wherever he could. Emily listens, her heart breaking for this boy who's had to endure so much. "You don't deserve this," she tells him softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I'm going to help you." Emily becomes Marcus's fiercest advocate, reaching out to local community leaders and media outlets. She organizes interviews, urging the public to see Marcus not as a criminal, but as a child who's been failed by the system. The city begins to divide. On one side are those who defend Monroe, arguing that he was simply enforcing the law. On the other are thousands demanding accountability, their voices growing louder with every passing hour. Protests erupt in front of the precinct, signs raised high with messages like "Justice for Marcus" and "End Police Violence." As the spotlight on the case intensifies, Marcus remains quiet, staying close to Emily. But deep down, he knows this isn't just about him anymore, it's about something much bigger. The Atlanta Police Department, under mounting pressure from the media and public, announces an internal investigation into Officer Monroe's actions. Cameras flash as Chief of Police Raymond Carter steps up to the podium during a press conference, promising a thorough and unbiased review of the incident. His words feel hollow to many, especially those in the crowd holding signs that read "Justice for Marcus" and "No More Excuses." Inside the precinct, Monroe remains unbothered. Sitting in an interrogation room, he leans back in his chair, arms crossed. "I was doing my job," he tells the investigator. "That kid was stealing. I followed protocol." His voice is firm, almost defiant. To him, the incident was nothing more than another day on the job. But not everyone in the department agrees. Officer Sarah Davis stands in front of her locker, staring at her reflection in the small mirror inside the door. She knows the risks of speaking out against a senior officer like Monroe. Yet, every time she replays the video in her mind, she feels a surge of anger and shame. Later that day, Sarah walks into the internal review meeting. The room goes silent as she takes a seat. When it's her turn to speak, her voice is steady but resolute. "What Officer Monroe did wasn't enforcing the law," she says, locking eyes with the review board. "It was an abuse of power fueled by bias." The room is tense, her words hanging heavy in the air. Monroe scoffs, rolling his eyes, but Sarah doesn't falter. "We're supposed to protect and serve everyone," she continues. Marcus Carter deserved better. Meanwhile, the media focuses on Marcus's story. Reporters visit the shelter where he's staying, and Emily Carter stands by his side during interviews. Marcus recounts his life, how he lost his parents to a car accident, how he was shuffled through foster homes before ending up on the streets, and how hunger pushed him to take that apple. His voice cracks as he speaks, but he refuses to cry. "I didn't steal it to hurt anyone," Marcus says during one interview. "I was just hungry." The footage goes viral, and his story touches hearts across the nation. People begin to see him not as a suspect but as a victim of a broken system. Donations pour into the shelter where he's staying, and offers of support come from all corners of the country. Protests erupt in downtown Atlanta, with thousands marching through the streets. Signs demanding justice for Marcus and end police violence fill the air. Protesters chant, their voices echoing through the city. The movement grows beyond Marcus. It becomes a rallying cry for police reform, accountability, and an end to racial bias in law enforcement. As the protests swell, Sarah feels a flicker of hope. For the first time, it seems like change might be possible if only the department has the courage to see it through. The courtroom is filled with tension as Marcus Carter steps to the witness stand. The room goes silent, all eyes on him. His hands tremble slightly, but he stands tall, a young boy forced to grow up far too soon. As he begins to speak, the weight of his experience fills the air. "I didn't ask for any of this," Marcus says, his voice quiet but firm. "I was just hungry. I wasn't trying to steal anything. I didn't deserve what happened to me." His words are simple, but the truth behind them cuts deep. The humiliation, the blood on his face, the pain of being seen as less than human, all of it floods back. The room is still, and the judge watches intently, absorbing every word. The jurors exchange glances, their expressions a mix of disbelief and empathy. For many, it's the first time they've truly seen Marcus as a person, not just as a statistic or a threat. In the days following Marcus's testimony, the media coverage intensifies. But it's not just the videos of the incident that are making waves. A video of Emily Carter, Marcus's advocate, speaking out on his behalf begins to spread like wildfire. Emily, standing outside the courthouse, speaks with conviction. "Marcus deserves justice," she says, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "What happened to him was wrong. He's not a criminal. He's a kid who needs help, and he needs our support." The video goes viral within hours, viewed by millions. The hashtag Justice for Marcus trends nationwide. More people join the cause, and donations for Marcus's legal fees and support begin to pour in. Emily's words become a rallying cry for those demanding justice, and the movement picks up steam. Meanwhile, Officer Monroe can feel the pressure mounting. Public opinion is rapidly turning against him. The once supportive voices now seem distant, replaced by a growing chorus of outrage. News outlets dissect his past behavior, highlighting other questionable actions and his history of aggressive interactions with civilians. In the precinct, Monroe tries to maintain his composure, but it's clear that he's rattled. The usually confident, authoritative officer now seems uncertain, his arrogance replaced by an unease that he can't shake. The turning point comes when the judge delivers the decision on Monroe's status. The room goes quiet as the judge speaks, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Effective immediately, the judge announces, Officer Jack Monroe is temporarily suspended from duty pending a full investigation into his conduct. The decision hits Monroe like a punch to the gut. He had been so sure of his actions, convinced he was in the right. But now, the reality of his situation begins to sink in. The public is no longer on his side, and his career is in jeopardy. For Marcus, the news of Monroe's suspension is a bittersweet victory. While he knows it's a step in the right direction, he also understands that it doesn't erase the trauma he's faced. The road to justice is long, and this is just one small part of it. The emotional impact of the case ripples through the community. For Marcus, the support he's receiving is overwhelming, but it's also exhausting. The constant media attention, the pressure of being the face of a movement, he just wants to go back to being a regular teenager, free from the weight of the world on his shoulders. Monroe, too, feels the emotional toll. As the investigation continues, he begins to reflect on his actions in a way he never has before. For the first time, he questions whether he truly upheld the law or whether he let his own biases shape his decisions. The turning point isn't just a moment in the courtroom, it's a moment of self-reflection for Marcus, for Monroe, and for the entire community. The courtroom is packed once again as the final verdict is delivered. Officer Jack Monroe sits rigidly, his face pale as the judge pronounces him guilty of using excessive force. The room is silent, save for the sound of the gavel striking. Monroe's once confident demeanor crumbles, and it's clear that the consequences of his actions are no longer avoidable. He faces disciplinary actions, including permanent suspension and the loss of his job. The weight of his wrongdoings is finally catching up to him, and the realization is hard to bear. But for Marcus, this moment doesn't just signify justice, it marks the beginning of something much bigger. As the case wraps up, he stands before the public as a symbol of resilience and strength. The boy who was once a victim is now an advocate, using his voice to demand lasting change in the system that nearly destroyed him. Marcus speaks at rallies and community meetings, calling for police reform and accountability. His message is clear: the system needs to change, and it starts with understanding and empathy, not violence and fear. No one should fear the people who are meant to protect them, Marcus says in one of his speeches, his voice unwavering. We need to work together to create a safer, fairer world for everyone, no matter their color or background. Meanwhile, Officer Sarah Davis, a quiet but determined force within the department, takes a brave step toward fostering positive change. She launches a community outreach program aiming to bridge the gap between police officers and marginalized communities. The program focuses on building trust, offering resources to at-risk neighborhoods, and providing a safe space for open dialogue between the community and law enforcement. Sarah's initiative faces resistance from some within the department, but she presses on, knowing the importance of this work. Over time, more officers begin to support her efforts, seeing the potential for real change. They start to realize that the community's trust is earned, not taken, and that empathy can go much further than force ever will. In response to the public outcry, the police department begins implementing mandatory training on racial bias, cultural awareness, and de-escalation techniques. Officers are required to undergo intensive workshops aimed at fostering a deeper understanding of the communities they serve and learning how to defuse tense situations without resorting to violence. The changes are small at first, but they are significant. More officers start engaging with community members, attending local events, and listening to the concerns of those they protect. People begin to feel heard, and slowly, the relationship between the police and the community begins to shift. The city, once torn apart by division and mistrust, begins to heal. More and more people, inspired by Marcus's courage and Officer Davis's efforts, stand up against racism and injustice. The momentum grows, and what started as a painful incident becomes the catalyst for a movement that is changing lives. The fight isn't over, but it's clear that a shift has occurred, a shift toward accountability, understanding, and change. And it's just the beginning. The community, once divided and hesitant to confront the uncomfortable truths about racial injustice, is now growing stronger and more united. What started as a moment of brutality has ignited a powerful movement for change. Marcus, who once wandered the streets lost and without hope, has found a new purpose. He becomes a youth advocate, using his voice to speak up for others who feel powerless. He is no longer just a victim, he's a symbol of resilience and a force for positive change. The shift in the city is undeniable. People are now coming together, confronting the ugly realities of racism, and demanding that things be different. Marcus's courage has sparked a fire in others, and that fire is slowly but surely changing the culture, not just in his community, but across the country. But the journey isn't over. The lesson learned is simple, yet powerful. This story is not just about Marcus and Monroe, it's about all of us. Racism thrives in silence, but change begins with courage. Will you stand up for what's right? If this story moved you, share it with others. Help spread awareness about the importance of fighting racism and standing up against injustice. The more voices we have, the more powerful the message becomes. What would you have done if you were a bystander in that moment? Let us know in the comments below. If you want to hear more stories of resilience and change, check out our next video that highlights other inspiring journeys of standing up for what's right. Let's keep the conversation going.